On Friday the 27th of September 2002, the family of 18-year-old Rachel Bruckheimer file a missing person report with Snohomish County Sheriff's Office.
By that point, we knew definitely something is very wrong.
It was not like her to just leave and not get in touch with somebody.
Rachel had left home 4 days earlier on the 23rd of September, and no contact has been made with her since then.
There was a missing person poster for Rachel, and I was in complete shock.
It's 1 week later that police receive a tip-off which will lead them to a grim discovery in a remote forest clearing.
A case like this is going to impact anybody that is aware of it. I wish I could get the details out of my head. I can't.
This is the story of the murder of Rachel Bruckheimer, a jealous ex-boyfriend, and a guns-for-hire drug-dealing gang at the center of the investigation.
There had been concerns raised that she was snitching on them and that there was some amount of retribution to be had.
They were people who were following the orders of an older person who obviously must have intimidated them into doing it.
I didn't have any thought for one moment that he was capable of the evil that he was capable of.
The city of Everett, Washington, is located in the Pacific Northwest, close to the border with Canada.
It's in the middle of Snohomish County, so it's the county just exactly north of Seattle.
You have very wealthy people, you have very highly educated people, and it goes all the way down to very, very poor people.
They do have elevated amount of crime for the size of the city that it is.
On Monday the 23rd of September 2002, 18-year-old Rachel Bruckheimer leaves her home on the Tulalip Reservation near Marysville to meet friends in nearby Everett.
I came home from work, and I remember I was really excited to talk to her that day, and I remember thinking, darn, I just missed her. I wanted to talk to her. But then I turned around and I looked on the counter, and there was a to-do list that said that she was going to drop off job applications and all these other little errands. And then at the bottom it said, be home for Jada tonight, which was my daughter. So I remember reading that and thinking, oh, no big deal. I'll just see her later tonight.
It wouldn't be unusual for somebody in that kind of lifestyle to go off partying for 3 or 4 or 5 days. That certainly couldn't have been ruled out at that point.
The following day, Rachel fails to return home, and she is not answering her phone.
Something felt very off, and I remember my mother called me, and she said, have you heard from Rachel? And I said, no, I haven't, and she hasn't been home. She said, I'm really worried. I talked to her yesterday on the phone in the afternoon, and she said she was going to call me right back, that she was going through a drive-thru with a friend. And I never heard back from her.
More days pass, but there is still no sign of Rachel. Then a missed voicemail from one of Rachel's friends sends her family into a panic.
It's 6 a.m. in the morning, and I'm getting ready for work. And I remember the phone ringing at our house. I went running because I knew that was odd. I missed it. There was a voicemail. I listened to the voicemail, and it is her very best friend, Carrie. And her friend Carrie on the voicemail is saying, Rachel, where are you? Please call me and let me know you're okay. I don't know what's going on. And I called my dad down. He listened to the voicemail, and I'll just never forget seeing his face. He went white. He was in shock.
Rachel's family immediately contact Snohomish County Sheriff's Office.
After Rachel had been missing 4 days, the family went to the police.
Her family reported her missing on Friday, and one of our patrol officers took the missing persons report.
The patrol deputies go out and they ask the general questions. Who, what, when, where, how, and why. When was Rachel last seen? Who was she seen with? What was she wearing? Did she take her purse? Was anything left behind? Who was she supposedly seen with?
Police file a missing person report, but treat the case as a suspected runaway.
Rachel was not a minor, she was 18, and the rules are a little bit different. If she'd been a minor, they probably would have started looking for her right away.
The police would not help us initially. But even though we told them this was not like her personal belongings were still all at home, they said she's 18 years old and she has the right to disappear.
Law enforcement resources get stretched really thin, and officers can only be in so many places at once. And unless they have an active crime scene and an active case, they're less likely to kind of take something else on a hunch.
Rachel's family now take matters into their own hands.
Rachel's family did exactly what it needed to do, and they didn't wait for the police to start looking. They created missing posters with her photo.
We had to get the help of all family and friends and volunteers to help post these pictures around of her and to go looking ourselves. We were turning every stone and going from every end of the county and other counties, putting pictures everywhere, asking for help.
The Bruckheimers even traveled to Seattle to put up missing posters.
We're 20 miles from Seattle. It's not unusual for kids and teenagers that are out and about end up down in Seattle, and some of them kids come up here and hang out.
It's at this point, 3 days after her disappearance, that Rachel's family receive an unexpected phone call from her ex-boyfriend.
I got a call from him saying Rachel's car is in my apartment complex. So I immediately left work and I rushed there, and her car was backed in to a parking spot. I immediately knew right when I looked at the car that she did not park that car, because my sister never ever backed into parking spots. That's typically something guys do. I looked into the car and her wallet was on the seat with her ID, $80 cash. The car was unlocked and the driver's side seat was all the way back.
The front seat, indicating who was driving the vehicle, was not pulled all the way up like a little short Rachel was driving the car. It was pushed all the way back, indicating a very tall person had parked the car there.
Whoever knew where she was or whatever happened to her, they're the ones that parked this car. So we called the police, and that's when they finally took us serious and agreed that there was foul play involved.
Police now launch an investigation into Rachel's disappearance.
I came back to work on the following Tuesday morning, and the case had been assigned to me over the weekend.
Detective Pence and I got the case. We made a subsequent appointment to meet with her father so we could get additional information.
When I met with the family, they were all there. Her dad, Bill, is the one that I dealt with the most, and he made it real clear that he did not believe that Rachel had just gone off somewhere voluntarily and didn't get in touch with the family.
Investigators ask questions about Rachel's life for any clues as to why she would suddenly disappear without informing her family or friends. They soon learn about one abusive ex-boyfriend called John Diggy Anderson. Rachel had dated Anderson while he was serving time in prison.
She told me that he was a bad boy, and this was the first bad boy that she had dated that was never her type, and he had a presence about him because everybody was afraid of him. It was some sort of intrigue with that for her, but that wasn't her usual type.
Bill shared the information about John Anderson and that group of friends that John Henderson had with him, and he shared the name of another individual that Rachel was acquainted with and that group of friends, and they were both in two different areas. The one was down in the Linwood, Edmonds area, and the other one was out in the Lake Stevens area.
Police receive more information from the community and begin to build a picture of the events leading up to the day of Rachel's disappearance.
A few of her friends called and let us know when the last time they saw her and what she was doing and where she was at. And then we got some information from family members of some of these people that were involved in this.
One tip-off from the mother of Rachel's friend, Jeffrey Barth, is of particular interest to investigators.
Barth's mom called and let us know that there was a lot of strange things happening in the other half of the duplex. The individuals that lived there were very shady. She was very suspicious that Rachel had been over at that duplex and something bad had happened to her.
The occupant of the duplex is 32-year-old Yusuf Jihad, who lives there with his girlfriend Trish Connor and her young daughter.
Jeffrey Barth's mother had seen Rachel at the duplex directly next door to where she lived. She saw her arrive in a red Jeep. We did some follow-up and we found that the red Jeep was actually registered to a 17-year-old by the name of Matthew Durham.
Investigators learn that Matthew Durham, Jeffrey Barth, and Yusuf Jihad were all friends with Rachel's ex-boyfriend, John Diggy Anderson.
We took several of the detectives that I work with and we drove down to the duplex and knocked on the door and started talking to people. A couple of them didn't want to talk to us at all. The ones that we did talk to, they said that they knew Rachel, but they hadn't seen her in a long, long time, and just pretty much denied everything.
Later that night, after police leave, neighbors report some suspicious activity amongst the friendship group.
The individuals that were involved were seen cleaning the garage, hauling a bunch of stuff out of the duplex. They were seen with a rolled up blanket and they put it in the back of Matthew Durham's Jeep and he drove off. After we got additional information from Barth's mom and other witnesses there at the scene, we developed enough probable cause to get a search warrant for the duplex.
September 2002, Snohomish County, Washington. 18-year-old Rachel Bruckheimer is reported missing by her family after she fails to return home from visiting friends in Everett.
She was last seen on the 23rd. Her family looked for her for several days and then she was reported missing on the 27th, and they were very worried about her.
She was one that could walk into a room and make anyone laugh, anyone smile, anyone feel better. She had these beautiful crystal blue eyes and this big, beautiful smile, and this just did not seem like this was really happening.
A tip-off from the community leads investigators to an apartment on Merino Avenue in South Everett, 20 miles from where Rachel lived. Investigators obtain a search warrant and call in the FBI to assist them with gathering evidence.
We had requested assistance from the FBI crime scene team. They were going to conduct the search of the duplex for us. We got down there and started interviewing some of the key players in this, and their stories weren't matching up very well, and finally got enough information that yes, something happened, and something happened with Matthew Durham's Jeep.
Detectives now search for 17-year-old Matthew Durham and his red Jeep. Could he provide them with new information about Rachel's disappearance?
We had a search warrant for Matthew Durham's Jeep based on the information we'd got the night before. The two detectives first went looking for him at the school to see if they could find the Jeep and recover it. And when that didn't happen, they went over to his house and knocked on the door to try and interview him and to obtain the Jeep that we had the search warrant for.
Durham said that he had seen her approximately 10 days ago at the Manor Market, and that he really didn't initially have any further information about her whereabouts. But he was interviewed again, and that's when the real break in the case came.
Matthew Durham reveals to police a complicated history between Rachel and his circle of friends who call themselves the Northwest Mafia.
The Northwest Mafia was this group of young criminals. They sold drugs, they committed burglaries. It wasn't real serious. They were just a group of kids committing crimes.
Durham informs police that the leader of the Northwest Mafia is 32-year-old Yusuf Jihad, who runs the gang from his Merino Avenue duplex.
Yusuf was trying to get his life together. He had come up from California, and he was on probation in California and was not supposed to be out of the state.
Other gang members include John Whitaker, Jeffrey Barth, and Rachel's ex-boyfriend, John Diggy Anderson.
John Anderson had been in jail before. He had a record when Rachel met him.
He was a hardcore criminal. He'd been dealing with the criminal justice system from about the time he was 11.
During their relationship, Anderson displays many signs of abusive behavior towards Rachel.
He didn't like her having any male friends whatsoever, and Rachel was a social butterfly. He even waited in the bushes at a party that she went to make sure that there weren't any other guys there, and there were, and he caused a commotion.
It's very hard to understand the relationship that they had, especially since he was a violent person and previously incarcerated.
Rachel's family soon became aware of her involvement with Anderson and urged her to leave him.
I only found out about him through my sister telling me that she was dating a new guy that she met at a high school party.
Rachel started talking to John Anderson while he was in prison. They spoke on the phone many times, and so that made him concerned, knowing that his daughter is talking to someone in prison.
Rachel's abusive relationship with Anderson began after a particularly traumatic period in her life.
During that time, she was already feeling more vulnerable. She had faced a lot of loss in her life. One of her best friends, named Corey, who she considered more like a soulmate, was killed tragically in a car accident.
That forever changed Rachel. It changed her whole being, to be honest. That was the turning point for her. It really changed her whole course of life because she started doing things and hanging around with people that she never, ever would have in the past.
Rachel eventually breaks up with Anderson and briefly dates his former roommate.
Rachel started dating one of John Anderson's friends. They were both into drugs and that kind of lifestyle, but because Rachel was now dating him, John Anderson hated this other guy.
I just told her to be very, very careful, to be very cautious, be aware of her surroundings, to be smart, and just stay away from him. She was very, very concerned because he was threatening her safety.
Anderson kept trying to get a hold of Rachel because he wanted to talk to her. At one point, Rachel invited Anderson and the whole group to a drinking party at a hotel in Everett. Whitaker and Jihad decided that they were going to go to this party. They pull into the parking lot of this hotel, and they could see all of these young people on the balcony of this hotel drinking and having fun. Well, they spotted John Anderson's ex-roommate. In their minds, they decided that Rachel was trying to set them up and get them robbed or get them killed.
Anderson, already fueled by jealousy, is now under pressure from his fellow gang members to act.
Jihad and Whitaker were convinced that she was trying to get them killed and that she was betraying them and that it was up to John Anderson to deal with it because she was his ex-girlfriend.
John Diggy Anderson now hatches a twisted plan to kidnap Rachel and punish her for the alleged betrayal of the Northwest Mafia gang. Snohomish County, Washington. Police investigating the case of 18-year-old Rachel Bruckheimer are closing in on the gang that they believe are responsible for her disappearance. Rachel was last seen by her family on Monday the 23rd of September and has been missing for over a week.
This seemed like something out of a movie. This seemed like something that happened to other people. But I did think that whoever she's been hanging out with has something to do with this. Somebody knows something.
Investigators learned that Rachel was involved with a gang of small-time criminals, calling themselves the Northwest Mafia. Investigators question gang member Matthew Durham, who informs them of the plot by Rachel's ex-boyfriend John Diggy Anderson and fellow gang member Maurice Rivas to kidnap Rachel in revenge for betraying them to a rival gang.
Rachel was going to hang out with Maurice Rivas and Nate Lovelace, and she had met with them at Nate's house.
Maurice and Durham were there with Rachel while all of this was going on. They were going to have her park in the garage, and then these guys were going to grab her and deal with it.
But the gang's original plan to kidnap Rachel now changes.
The kid that lived there chickened out and told everybody that his dad was expected to come home early so that they couldn't do it in his garage anymore. John Anderson called Durham and told him to grab Rachel and bring her down to the duplex, even if it means putting a gun to her head.
That is when they kind of performed a ruse and said, Rachel, Diggy wants to talk to you, so we're going to go over there and hang out.
Rachel said, fine, I need to talk to him anyway, so she agreed to go down there voluntarily.
So they brought Rachel to the Merino Drive address, which ended up being the address of a Kevin Youssef Jihad and his girlfriend, Trissa Connor.
John Anderson is not there at the time. I later found out he was out back supposedly trying to dig a hole.
Rachel was enjoying herself with her friends, smoking some marijuana and playing some games and laughing.
They were just hanging out, talking. Youssef Jihad, Maurice Rivas, Rachel, Matt Durham. Jeff Barth is also in the house at that point.
But the mood changes suddenly when John Anderson arrives.
He comes in and sees everybody sitting around the couch having a good time with Rachel, and he blows up. He's mad.
He ended up getting in a fist fight with Jeff Barth, and he had punched a couple of the guys. And then Rachel and Rivas and Matt were going to leave, and that's when John Anderson grabbed her by the arm.
He grabs her by the hair, hits her in the face, and knocks her down behind a couch.
Tony Williams was a cousin of Trissa Connor. He happened to be there also. He supplied the tape and actually helped tape up her hands. John Anderson ended up putting a sock in her mouth because she started to cry. And they also turned up the music to drown out her cries for help. They bound her and gagged her and had her in the garage of the duplex.
After Rachel had been kidnapped and held in the garage for several hours, everybody knows what's going on. They're all standing around. They're doing a lot of cocaine. They order pizza. They're all trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen.
Youssef's girlfriend, Trissa Connor, had come home while Rachel was in the garage, tied up, and she was upset because all these people are in her house.
She's looking for Jihad. and she can't find him. And everybody's acting a little suspicious. She tries to go to the garage, but the door's locked. So she's knocking on the door, demanding that they let her in to the garage.
Trissa was a decent person. She had a young daughter and she was going to school for nursing. She walks into the garage and she sees Rachel tied up and crying. She sees her mouth bound. She goes back into the house, grabs a knife, and tries to cut her hands free. And at that point, Diggy gets involved and stops her from doing it.
Her boyfriend Jihad was there. She started screaming at him, and she was screaming like, "Get that out of my house. Get her the hell out of here. I don't want this going on at my house."
Rachel was put in the bag and was carried out to Matt Durham's red Jeep. And Maurice Rivas rode in the back with Rachel while Matt Durham drove.
They drove around for a long time because John Anderson had told John Whitaker to go and get rid of her.
John Whitaker, Matt Durham, and Maurice Rivas all ride in the red Jeep. They knew that she was going to be killed. I don't think they knew it entirely, but I think that they knew it was going to go down. It was going to happen.
Whitaker and his fellow gang members have no plan for what to do next with Rachel.
They drove around for several hours trying to figure out what to do, and then they decided that they were going to go back and get John Anderson and let him deal with it.
They pulled over and they stopped at a trailhead. Maurice Rivas gets out of the vehicle with Rachel in the bag, and they stay there for a period of time while Matt Durham goes and picks up John Anderson.
Rachel is now alone in the wilderness with Maurice Rivas, whom she previously considered to be a close friend.
She spoke about Maurice a lot. It was this friend of hers that she really liked. They were going to attempt to, go back to school, get on the right track.
While Maurice and Rachel were at this trailhead, Maurice took the tape off of her mouth and had a conversation with her. She was very afraid that they were going to kill her. Maurice was trying to convince her that he didn't think that was going to happen. Rachel begged him that if she was going to have to die, to please shoot her because she didn't want to drown.
She figured at that point something bad was going to happen because she cried to Maurice to not let John Diggy drown her. She had a fear of being drowned, of water, and she didn't want to be drowned.
The other group comes back, they pick her up, they put her in the Jeep, and they drive out by Gold Bar to a remote area where there's a lot of four-wheel driving and dirt bike riding.
At that point, Matt Durham, John Whitaker, John Diggy Anderson, and Maurice Rivas were all present. They drove her up there late at night off of Reeder Road, and they splintered off of one of these side dirt roads.
They get to a location that John Anderson picked, and they get out and they start digging a grave. The grave was mostly dug by Maurice, Whitaker, and John Anderson. Durham was a little sick to his stomach, so he sat in the Jeep during most of this.
She saw them digging her grave. It must just be the most traumatic thing that you could witness. But at some point she reconciled somehow that they were going to kill her, and she would do it her way if she could. She knew she was going to die.
At that time, Rachel was released out of the bag. She was told to strip down. John Anderson was armed with a gun at that point.
And they had her kneel in the grave. While she was down there, apparently she was praying. John Anderson was quoted as saying, "Don't worry, you'll be with him soon," and then began shooting.
Matt Durham was sitting in the vehicle. He had heard a gunshot. He had heard some yelling, and he heard Anderson say, "Get on your knees and get in there," something to that effect.
He fired once or twice, then the gun jammed. He ejected that round and fired another couple of times.
Once they put her in the hole and they shot her, they buried her back up. They covered the grave up as best they could. It was dark and late at night, so they didn't really know how good of a job they did. They drove themselves out of there and left her behind.
Snohomish County, Washington. Police investigating the disappearance of 18-year-old Rachel Bruckheimer believe she has been murdered by her ex-boyfriend, John Diggy Anderson, and his gang, the Northwest Mafia. One gang member, 17-year-old Matthew Durham, confesses to his role in the crime and offers to take police to Rachel's unmarked grave in the Cascade Mountains.
After we had Matthew Durham in custody, he took the detectives to the gravesite.
We would do video of the location of where it was. So the Reeder Road area, the turnoff to where the dirt was, where we turned off, and then video all the way up to the gravesite. We had an idea of where the grave was. One of the detectives took a shovel, and just because we had to verify that it was in fact a grave, that there was somebody there before we took our next steps. So he took a scoop of dirt out, and immediately we could see flesh.
The morning that Durham had taken my partners to the gravesite, I went to Bill's house and told him what I knew. When we found the body, I let him know right away that Rachel had been recovered.
I was woken up by my dad. It was 7 a.m. in the morning, and he woke me up and he said, "Detective Pence is here." So I came downstairs, and Detective Pence had a look in his eyes. You could tell he was sad. And he told us that Rachel had been discovered and that we were just waiting on identity with her dental records, but that they had found her. And at that moment, my dad and I had to drive to my mom's house to tell her the news that her daughter is dead. And I just remember it being this really eerie, foggy, gray morning, and she opened the door, and I remember we were just looking at her with tears in her eyes, and she just knew, and she let out this horrible scream, and she just fell to the floor, and it was awful. We were just in shock.
Police now move to recover evidence and apprehend all the suspects involved in Rachel's murder.
After the detectives found where the grave was, we notified the medical examiner's office, and the next morning is when we showed back up with our crime scene van that had all of our equipment. That's when we started to process all the area around the grave. We would pick up or photograph any tire tracks that were there. We would photograph and pick up cigarette butts, pieces of paper, anything that we thought could have tied a suspect to that incident.
When other detectives were out at the gravesite trying to locate evidence out there, I was dealing with Matthew Durham and his attorney, and Matthew Durham agreed to take me and show me where all of the evidence had been disposed of. They took Rachel's clothing to an abandoned cul-de-sac in the Linwood area and burnt all of her clothing. And her rings and jewelry were at that same location. They took the gun that had been used to kill her to is a little pond down in South Snohomish County next to the freeway. They threw the handgun in there. They took the bag that she'd been transported in and threw it in some trees there in the Everett area. And that was pretty much most of the evidence that we recovered.
Investigators now move to arrest the remaining gang members still at large.
Saturday evening, there was a party at this juvenile's house where Rachel originally was going to be attacked. I got a call. John Anderson was at this party. So I sent patrol over to lock the place down and to get everybody out of the house as best they could. Maurice Rivas was there. I didn't know that initially, but he was one of them that we were looking for. So he was arrested. John Anderson would not come out of the house. He apparently climbed up in the attic. So we ended up getting a search warrant for the place, and our SWAT team eventually went in and arrested him out of the attic.
The remaining gang members have fled the area following the news coverage of the case.
We tracked Whitaker, Barth, and Jihad to California.
Investigators contact federal law enforcement agencies to assist them with apprehending the suspects.
We had a description of the vehicle that they had fled in. We used cell phone tower information for location. And through LAPD and the Fugitive Task Force, we were able to do live tracking of the cell phone. We had an area down in LA where they kept hitting on one particular tower. The Fugitive Task Force members saw the vehicle pulling into this little strip hotel and took them down and arrested all of them.
Each day, it seemed there was yet another suspect, and it just kept going. And we just couldn't believe what was happening and how many were involved. It was unreal.
Tony Williams started off, we were treating him more like a witness, but his cooperation level dwindled a little bit, so he was eventually arrested and charged. Nate Lovelace started off being a witness, but he also ended up being charged in this case. All in all, there were 8 people charged.
The 3 ringleaders go on trial in Snohomish County Courthouse for murder in the first degree.
The first trial was Yusuf Jihad, the oldest of the bunch. He was tried and found guilty. Then it was John Anderson's trial, and then John Whitaker was the third trial. Barth and Tony Williams pled guilty to first-degree kidnapping in exchange for their testimony against the other 3 defendants. Maurice Rivas and Matthew Durham pled guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for their cooperation with this case. And Nate Lovelace pled guilty to rendering criminal assistance in the first degree.
The hardest thing for Rachel's family is the years that it took to try these young men. There were trials and retrials, and it's really important to families to show up, to be there, because they want to remind the people who killed their child that they are representing Rachel in the courtroom, because she can't be there.
It was horrible to try to restrain yourself from someone who viciously killed your family, and to have to sit there and just look at them. You can't do anything, you can't say anything. It was like you're in a prison yourself.
Victim support services got involved from the very beginning. We can kind of explain how the system works, what to expect. And with that many defendants, that is a lot. So we had a few advocates stepping in to help navigate all of the systems they were thrown into.
All of these defendants had several hearings in front of the judge, and the Berkheimer family was there at every one of them. They were in court probably hundreds of times. They had to sit there and listen to details of what happened to Rachel, and also listen to attorneys make silly arguments of why their clients shouldn't be held responsible for what they did.
The cruelty of John Diggy Anderson towards Rachel's family continues, even in the courtroom.
He would come into that courtroom before the judge and the jurors would enter, and he would come in with a big smile on his face. And he would smile at us and nod, and he would turn around and look at us, and he would laugh, and he would wink, and he would taunt us and mock us. He showed zero remorse. He was actually really happy about what he did.
He doesn't care who he hurts and harms and who he brings down with him. Just no remorse whatsoever. And that can be very frustrating for victims that choose to sit in the courtroom and face the offenders. They can re-victimize the victim sitting there in court.
Rachel's family are left wondering if her murder could have been prevented.
Clearly, John Anderson is the one that pushed it as far as it did. But he was also being pushed by Whitaker and Jihad to deal with her.
For some reason, Trissa didn't call the police. She could have saved her life had she called the police. Yusef Jihad was calling the shots. He was the oldest. It happened in his house. He could have said, along with Trissa, no, you guys aren't coming here.
So you have a range of ages, which creates some amount of power differential in terms of people having a bit more authority in telling others what to do. You also have a bunch of kids that don't have the neurocognitive functioning to think through the bigger picture of this, and they're only focused in what's in the moment, what's in front of them right now, what's the next answer to the next problem, and not seeing the bigger picture.
Rachel's family continue to have mixed feelings about the criminal justice system.
I will never, ever drop my high regards and gratitude for the prosecution and the detectives that worked on my sister's case. I hold them as heroes. But the system itself has completely just devastated myself and my family all over again.
I believe they were very relieved that everybody that was taken to trial was convicted, and that the others that were involved had agreed to be convicted of various crimes.
I think all of them are absolute just scum of the earth, because I don't know how a human being could do those acts to another human being. I have lost all faith and all respect for the justice system. In fact, I don't think there's any justice at all. I don't believe in it. I don't trust in it. I'm sickened by it. I'm angry at it. I'm hurt by it.
September 2015, Dallas, Texas. Police are called to a garage in a high-end apartment complex. A body has been found.
It was almost like an execution-style murder. I mean, she had no warning that this was coming.
The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
But the profile of the victim and the manner of death lead investigators to believe that this is more than a random shooting.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
What detectives soon uncover is a complex conspiracy.
Just the lengths that someone would go to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend.
I don't think she even thought about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Unfortunately, there are people in this world who would kill another human being and not give it a second thought.
This is the story of the tragic murder of Kendra Hatcher, the detailed and methodical search for her killer, and a motive which police soon learn was triggered by jealousy and rage. It's just after 8 p.m. on the evening of September 2nd, 2015. Police respond to a 911 call from a luxurious high-rise apartment building in Dallas's Uptown.
Dallas 911, where's emergency?
Hi, someone just got shot in the parking lot of the Gables Park 17. All I heard was screaming and then a loud pop, and then I saw her laying on the floor and it was like blood coming out of her neck. The people, they had a mask on, and I think it was a black Jeep Cherokee.
I responded to that and was told by the officers that were securing the scene outside that there was someone that was deceased inside of the parking lot.
I saw a white Toyota Camry pulled in a parking space. The driver's side of the vehicle, the victim was laying on the ground. There was a pool of blood around her head.
She was dressed in black doctor scrubs, and her name was embroidered on the front of her shirt.
It was definite that she had been shot. Next to the body, there was a magazine from a handgun, a spent round, and a shell casing.
The police request the attendance of the medical examiner.
The medical examiner did arrive at the scene, and he was able to confirm that she was deceased from one gunshot wound to the head. The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
The police have already been able to confirm the identity of the deceased.
The officers, prior to my arrival, checked the license plate on the car, and that came back as Kendra Hatcher being the owner of the vehicle, which matched what was on her shirt also.
Detectives now begin to examine what evidence they can find.
The cell phone at the scene was given to the homicide investigators. Obviously, they wanted to find out what numbers had been recently called or dialed on that phone, what messages had come in. The pistol magazine, which was also found at the scene with 13 live rounds in it, I took back to our crime scene lab and processed for latent prints.
We looked for her purse, and we found out that her purse was missing. And so we just began doing our normal course of investigation, looking for witnesses and also video cameras inside the parking garage.
Officers established Kendra Hatcher's last movements.
I found out that Kendra was actually a resident in that building and that she was on her way home from work. September 2nd was her last day at work for a few days because she was going on a vacation.
Kendra's fiancé, Ricky Paniagua, soon arrives.
One of the most painful parts of this whole story that I think of is that Ricky, the fiance, was coming back into the apartment complex with dinner, and there was something going on. There were like police ropes and sirens and things were going on. He didn't know what was going on.
After speaking with him for a couple minutes, Ricky was able to tell me that him and Kendra had been dating for several months, and he was meeting Kendra at her apartment that evening to have dinner. Once he found out that we found Kendra deceased, you could just see just the color go from his body. He almost went into a state of shock once he was able to connect the dots.
Police begin to piece together more information about Kendra.
She had a very humble life growing up. Her mother owned a blanket shop in Springfield, Illinois. She was a cheerleader in high school, and she also was very devoted to her religion.
She was a rising star in her world of dentistry. She was someone that helped many, many people.
She worked with a clinic in the mid-cities of between Dallas and Fort Worth that specialized in lower-income kids because she wanted to help kids.
She also volunteered her time giving back to poor children in South America, donating her abilities as a dentist and her time and her effort to help kids that couldn't afford dentistry.
In recent months, Ricky and Kendra have become very close.
She had told her family that she was super excited about meeting this guy. She said that they're clicking and that, he's a dermatologist and that they would probably end up moving in a year or so after his residency ended. And she just seemed to be really super happy and excited about life.
The most immediate clue to what has happened to Kendra comes from the footage captured on the apartment complex's security camera system.
On the surveillance footage, we were able to see the victim come in to the parking garage and go to a normal parking space. We also found a footage of an older model Jeep Cherokee. This Jeep Cherokee was waiting in the visitor portion of the parking garage, and they followed another vehicle in and parked in a parking space before our victim got there.
She started to get out of her car. An assailant walked up and basically executed her, shot her in the head, took her purse, and fled.
The individual walked back to the back seat of the Jeep. The Jeep went out the wrong direction in the parking garage, made a U-turn, and then they exited.
But there are limitations to what the police can see on the CCTV.
After looking at the video, there was no way we could tell what kind of license plate was on that vehicle. And we had information that it may have been a paper tag.
Police feel the public might be able to help them.
They made the decision to release that tape to the public and say, hey, has anybody seen this vehicle, or do you know what's going on, or this is, this is very much of interest to us. And I think that was very, very key for them because that helped move the case along.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
Police have some security footage, a murdered woman and a distraught fiancé. But they have little else to point to a motive for what clearly is the clinical killing of Kendra Hatcher. Dallas, Texas, 2015. Police are investigating the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Most of the incident has been caught on security footage. Detectives have released the tape publicly in the hopes it might elicit a response and information. It does.
The media interest, it did help the case, obviously. I mean, when the news footage of the Jeep Cherokee leaving the garage, that jump-started the investigation when the owner called in.
The man is Jose Luis Ortiz, and he claims he lent his Jeep to a friend, Brenda Delgado.
Jose called in and said that he loaned his Jeep the same day of the murder to Brenda Delgado. Jose actually gave us a phone number for Brenda, and we called her. She told us, I'm house sitting for a friend over in Irving, and I don't have a ride, but if you can come pick me up, I'll come talk with you.
With this connection to the vehicle, Brenda Delgado immediately becomes a person of interest. Detectives try to establish more about her and her background.
Her parents immigrated from Mexico to America, so she still had dual citizenship in both countries. They were good working class folks. She graduated from an area high school. There wasn't money to go to college, so she started working. She got interested in the dental field. She was coming back to school and slowly finishing dental hygienist school when she was in her 30s.
The interesting thing about Brenda Delgado is that she is the former girlfriend of Ricky, the fiancé of Kendra Hatcher.
She had been with Mr. Paniagua several times, dating him. They broke it off. He then met Kendra Hatcher.
Brenda was, by all means, crazy in love with him, fascinated by him. They met the first time, got together, had a relationship. He broke it off. And then at some point after that, they started to get together casually. I would assume that meant they were probably hooking up, but it wasn't anything more. It wasn't a romantic relationship or a long-term relationship.
However, Brenda doesn't see things that way.
There were times where she would seem emotionally unstable. There would be times where she would be overly clingy and just kind of overly attached to him. And I felt like, that kind of fit in with the theme on this case, more so than a robbery.
It appears her view of the relationship has become obsessive.
He would be out for a run on Katy Trail here in Dallas, and she would suddenly run into him, make it appear that it was coincidental when in fact it wasn't. She was stalking him. So I think at that point she was just obsessed and she wanted to get him back any way she could.
For police, it's time to get face to face with Brenda Delgado.
Brenda gets called in for a voluntary interview, and she's cooperative. The Dallas police, smart as a bug, those folks taped everything.
Brenda gives the detectives her version of how she spent Wednesday, September 2nd, the day Kendra Hatcher was murdered.
Wednesday, I was in Carrollton,
Okay.
and I studied from maybe 12 all the way to like about 6. And then from 6 we went to Fuzzy's. We had some tacos at Fuzzy's in Carrollton.
Okay. Who were you studying with?
Billy, this guy, my classmate.
Okay. So how'd you get to Carrollton?
I got a ride to Carrollton.
Okay. Who gave you a ride?
Who gave me a ride? My friend, Crystal.
Crystal? She told me that early that morning she met up with her friend Crystal. They were having some problems with their vehicle, and she took it to Jose's shop. Jose's a mechanic. Jose looked at it and told her that he needed to work on it, and she borrowed his Jeep. She said that she had a study date that day with some friends, and Crystal dropped her off at a public library, and she spent most of the day studying. She also told me that the library had cameras, and it also had a sign-in log that I could check for her signature.
This level of detail immediately raises a red flag.
Most people don't pay attention to locations having cameras or sign-in logs. It was like it was already pre-formatted.
Brenda can also supply very specific details about where she was at the time of Kendra's death.
And I go to Chili's.
How did you get to the Chili's?
Billy took me.
Billy gave you a ride at Chili's? Okay.
I have the receipt in my bag. I can tell you exactly. That's all my clothes down.
Okay.
She probably figured if she just showed the receipt, an officer would say, sure, you weren't there, thank you, and that would be over. Fortunately, that's not the way it works in the world of crime.
Most people, when they come down and talk about murder, they're really nervous and kind of taken back. Either they're going to be overwhelmed emotionally because someone lost their life. They're going to be afraid because they're being questioned at a homicide investigation. She didn't seem to match any of those descriptions. She was very cool, calm, and collected, and very organized.
Detectives begin to get more specific with Delgado.
This is the picture of the young lady that got killed. Never seen her before?
I've never seen her.
Okay.
First, they started with Kendra Hatcher. Do you know this person? No, I've never met her. Well, she's engaged to Ricky Patiago. Do you know him? Oh, well, yes, Ricky and I are very close, but we're just friends now.
Detective Barnes needs to find out more about the vehicle used when the murder occurred.
I began to press her on who had had this Jeep. So when I pressed her on her location and whether she was driving the Jeep, she pointed a finger at Crystal and said, you need to talk with her.
Detectives now bring Brenda's friend Crystal Cortez in for questioning.
So she is in the police headquarters at the same time Brenda is, and they're interviewing both of them, taping both of them, and then super helpful for information back and forth.
There was a lot of different stories from Crystal. The first version was that she was looking for a parking space because she was going out to eat in a nearby restaurant. And she just happened to park inside the parking garage at the Gable 17. And she heard a loud noise and decided to leave the parking garage.
When I was up there, I heard a shot. I have my son in the back. So I said, no, you know what? Let me get out. I'm coming out. There's a guy running with a mask right in front of me. He stops, he looks dead at me, and I'm just like, horrid. I'm shaking literally at this point because I have my son in the back.
I confronted her with the fact that I actually saw someone get out of her vehicle and walk towards Dr. Hatcher.
Immediately, Crystal's story changes.
Crystal starts making up stories about she was just driving along the park with her son, and this scary man jumped in and told her to drive or he was going to kill her. And then she drove to the apartment complex and had no idea what happened.
However, she's confronted with the fact that there's no sign of anyone who could be considered to be her son on the tape.
Who else was in the vehicle with you?
Just my son, and he was asleep in the back, honestly.
No. That's not gonna work either. I want to be able to trust you, and I want to be able to believe you. And I know that what you're telling me is not true.
She switched up the story to be this friend of Brenda's and her drove into the apartment complex, and the motive was going to be robbery, and then she was just going to drive the getaway car, and they were going to be away with some money, and she was going to get $500, and they were going to scare Kendra.
But Crystal Cortez has done no more than implicate herself.
When Crystal admitted that Brenda paid her $500 to go to the parking garage with this unknown male who was armed with a firearm, she self-admitted she put herself at the crime scene. That was enough to charge her. We charged her with capital murder.
Meanwhile, Brenda is still being interviewed by detectives.
The more I watched Brenda Delgado, the more I just knew she was lying. They kept the film running when they would leave the room, or do you want to take a bathroom break, or do you want some snacks or whatever. So they were friendly to her, but there would be times when she was on camera by herself, the detectives were out of the room, talking to Crystal Cortez. She was just like, oh. And she was doing things like this, and I think she was realizing the trouble that she had stepped into and that what was happening while the detectives were interviewing her.
Agent Barnes now turns up the heat on Delgado.
I began pressing Brenda really hard about where she was at, what she was doing, and why they were there, and what they were there for. And I think that once I began pressing buttons, Brenda felt like she was gonna unravel and end up being charged, and she just asked for an attorney.
Brenda clearly hasn't been to the scene of the murder. Detectives don't have enough evidence to charge her, but instinctively they know she is involved in some way.
They felt they did not have enough to issue a warrant for arrest for murder, but they wanted to hold her. They ran her background check, and she had a whole bunch of parking violations, enough to be arrested.
Collectively, we decided it would be better to just put her in jail for her traffic tickets than to charge her with murder and have to release her if we couldn't find enough details to prove it at that point.
But Brenda has other plans.
As soon as somebody comes down here, or she on her own pays the $300 or $400 that's owed, whatever's the fine that's not paid, as soon as you pay that, they release you immediately. And so it's not like you're sticking them in jail on some kind of a serious charge where they're going to have to wait and see a judge, and you're going to have to go through at least an 18-hour process. You're putting her in there. She's going to be out potentially in a couple 2 to 4 hours, which she was.
We found out that she left jail. She called a taxi to a local hospital, and she called her father and asked her father to pick her up.
Within hours, Brenda Delgado flees the state and crosses the border into Mexico.
She already had her backup plan in place, and at that point, we were just playing catch-up.
Detectives now believe that Brenda Delgado is at the center of the murder of Kendra Hatcher.
All of the early indicators on this investigation seem to point back to Brenda. Jose didn't know Kendra. Crystal didn't know Kendra. It all pointed back at Brenda. Brenda had the motive to want Kendra dead.
In Dallas, Texas, police are hunting for Brenda Delgado, a suspect in the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Delgado has fled to Mexico, but investigators are continuing to question Crystal Cortez, Delgado's accomplice, who drove the Jeep from which the killer emerged to shoot Kendra. However, they are still trying to identify the shooter.
Just crunching down phone records between Brenda, Crystal. We also located a phone inside Brenda's apartment. We got phone records for that number, and all of these phones had a common phone number that they were communicating with. And we were able to locate that phone number and do some subpoenas for the phone records on that phone.
Police reach out to federal agencies for assistance.
The FBI got involved about a month after it happened. At the time, they hadn't identified the shooter in the case. They only knew him as Chris, so they were looking for help in that regard. They had a telephone number for Chris. We were able to obtain a search warrant to obtain the real-time location information associated with that phone. The pings on the phone brought us to an apartment complex in South Dallas.
That same day, Crystal is brought in for further questioning.
So there was the blue Sebring part right there.
Okay, was it an older looking Sebring?
No, this is like, it's your, maybe
like this color blue or dark blue?
No. It's a shiny blue.
She gives me a description of the shooter's car. And she said he drives a blue Chrysler Sebring. I picked my phone up and I called the FBI agents that were doing surveillance out in this parking lot and gave them the car description. And they told me that they see the car in the same parking lot. By watching the phone pings, they noticed the phone started moving. And they also noticed that the blue Chrysler Sebring was moving at the same time that the cell phone was moving. And it pulls over in a parking lot a couple blocks away from this apartment complex, and they walk up to him and make contact.
The man is Christopher Love. He is taken into custody and the car is impounded.
The car was towed to the auto pound, and I began interviewing Christopher Love. I interviewed him all the way through the course of the night into the early morning hours of October 2nd.
Searching the car, they didn't really find anything, and it was a little bit of a dead end.
Detectives have drawn a blank, so they turn to another police resource to intensify the investigation.
A canine that was in training at the time was brought to the Dallas Auto Pound. The canine had been trained to find explosives. That could be anywhere from gunpowder to bomb material C4.
They sniffed the car. The dog wisely stopped at a couple places. They found some residue, but they didn't find enough evidence yet. And then the dog zoomed in on the console in between the driver's and passenger seat, up one side and down the other. So that was super helpful. The investigators were able to remove the panel, and lo and behold, what's in there? A gun.
Christopher Love is confronted with what the canine has managed to uncover.
Once I showed him a picture of the firearm, it was like somebody letting the air out of a balloon. His body language, he just kind of sunk down in his chair. His head dropped. He tells me, okay. I was there. I was with Crystal. I got out of the Jeep to walk over to get Kendra's purse, and Crystal fired a shot from the Jeep out the window, and it hit Kendra. And he goes back into the Jeep and they drive away.
But Detective Barnes knows better.
I saw the video, and what he was describing was a scene out of a James Bond movie. There was no way that Crystal could throw the car in reverse, shoot out a passenger window while backing up, hit someone in the head, and one shot get it done. And also the magazine to the firearm was laying next to the body. So I knew that my shooter was there close range and standing beside Kendra whenever she died. There's a video camera from the parking garage on the other side. And that's how I know which side of the vehicle you got out of. And only one person got out of that vehicle.
I hopped in the driver's seat.
That one person that got out, the one person that got out of that vehicle was you. I actually pressed him a little bit about being the shooter. And when he didn't feel like there was any way out and there's no way to explain it other than to tell the truth, he asked for a lawyer. Well, I can tell you, man, that as far as this thing goes, that so once he terminated the interview, I went back to my desk and began typing his murder warrant, capital murder warrant, and he knocked on the door again. He wanted to sit and talk with me, and I told him I had to read his Miranda warning again if he wanted to talk, and he said okay. And he just wanted to ask me one question. He wanted to know, why did we let Brenda go? I thought it was pretty significant. I thought that was him saying, hey, you got me, now I want you to get her.
Crystal Cortez is also bowing to the inevitable.
I really want to go home to my baby.
You're not trying to cover for
No, I'm not
anybody?
covering anybody. I don't want nothing to do with this. I want to go home now. I really do. I want to go to my baby, okay?
I understand that.
I'm trying to, I'm helping you guys with everything I can. I just want to go home to Ivan, okay? I know you guys are trying to help me. I'm trying to help you out. I'm not trying to cover for anybody.
So Crystal was charged with capital murder. At some point, she agreed to a deal. The deal was, if you are truthful and if you can testify against Brenda, we will recommend you for 35 years to life. You will be pleading guilty to capital murder.
They needed Crystal to get to Brenda. It's the only opportunity for her. 17 and a half years, you're eligible for parole. You may or may not get it, but you're eligible. She's got a child. She's got to be thinking about a whole lot of things, and she doesn't want to be locked up till the day she dies.
She was the one that kind of put the pieces together for law enforcement, kind of explained what happened and allowed law enforcement to arrest the other people that were involved in it.
Detectives know they have Crystal and Christopher, but now the spotlight turns to Brenda Delgado. They strongly suspect that she has manipulated the other two.
One of the things that I learned working this case, that Brenda was very good at reading people. She was able to sit down with someone, figure out who that person was, figure out where they were at in life, and specifically what they needed in life.
It was a business transaction for them. Should we beat him up? Should we kill her? Should we... they just handled it as if it was business.
She actually offered Crystal $500. At the time, Crystal was a single mother. She was out of work because her vehicle wasn't working, and she needed some mechanic work done to her vehicle, and she didn't have the money to get it done. Brenda was able to figure out that she needed money to be able to go to work every day and take care of her child, and so she just kind of dangled that carrot in front of Crystal to get her to participate in this murder.
And it is becoming apparent that Brenda had lied to Christopher in order to manipulate him even further.
Christopher Love was a self-proclaimed low-level drug dealer that just moved to this Dallas area, and he wanted to be Scarface. He was looking forward to being the next up-and-coming drug dealer in Dallas, and Brenda picked up on that, and that's what she offered him. She told Christopher that she was part of the drug cartel, and that Kendra was actually stealing drugs from the cartel, and if he participated in this murder, that he'd get a lifetime supply of drugs.
At the center of everything appears to be Brenda's jealousy of Ricky's newfound happiness with Kendra.
I think her obsession with Kendra Hatcher and losing Dr. Paniagua was stronger than anything she could think of. She just had one goal in mind, and that was to either hurt Dr. Paniagua, which was one of the very first things that came into their minds, or remove Kendra Hatcher from the picture.
On Brenda's phone, we looked into the notes portion of her phone, and we found an email address for Ricardo and also a password. Based on our interviews with Crystal told us that Brenda was able to track Ricardo, and she was able to know where he was at.
When Ricky and Brenda were hooking up the second time around, Ricky was still helping her, so they had a joint cell phone account, and apparently that account gave her access to his phone online. She had put tracking software on his phone. She was able to know where that phone was, where he was.
She would find his location and she would go and watch him, and then she would go have casual encounters where she would randomly bump into him and have conversations with him.
And her obsession also extended to Kendra.
In Brenda's phone, she had a bunch of pictures and videos she downloaded from Kendra's Facebook page. She had been stalking Ricardo and Kendra at the same time, just kind of staying up with their relationship. And I think she used social media as a way just to kind of figure out what they were doing.
It is becoming clear that Brenda was going to do whatever it took to achieve her objective.
Not only had she approached Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love, we interviewed some people that she had approached before about trying to convince them to do the same thing. Namely, her cousin, having him attack Kendra Hatcher with a baseball bat. He ultimately declined to do so. So she had been trying to find someone who would carry this out for some time.
Crystal had got in deep and was doing what Brenda wanted.
And speaking with Crystal, she told me that she started going around just talking to people that they knew about, where they could get a gun, and also if they would be willing to help them in this murder. And through a mutual friend, a gentleman by the name of Kelly Ellis, Kelly knew Christopher Love and he introduced them.
For whatever reason, they just fell in and the ball started rolling and Crystal started agreeing to these things, and she found a shooter for Brenda. She agreed to drive the getaway vehicle. She helped Brenda get rid of evidence after the fact for $500 and some drugs.
Delgado was across the border, in her mind, safe from the authority of U.S. law enforcement.
My arrest authority ends in the state of Texas, and I think Brenda knew that. She felt like she was out of reach of the Dallas Police Department, but what she didn't plan for was that we have a partnership with the FBI, and they've got worldwide jurisdiction.
When people try to flee the U.S. to another country to escape justice, that always is a thorn in my side. So I always give those cases a little extra attention because I want to make sure that these people get caught and brought back to the U.S. I don't want people thinking that they can flee our borders and not answer the charges that are brought against them.
The FBI felt like the longer that she was free, the longer that she was evading law enforcement, that we were at risk for her committing another offense.
Dallas police now moved to make Brenda Delgado an international fugitive from justice.
We were able to get her on the FBI most wanted list. I was pretty excited about it because I knew that I would get my shot at her again.
In 2016, Dallas police and the FBI are continuing their investigation into the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Investigators have apprehended the man who pulled the trigger, Christopher Love, and the getaway driver, Crystal Cortez. However, they are still searching for the woman they believe orchestrated the crime, Brenda Delgado, who is a fugitive in Mexico and on the FBI's most wanted list. Detectives and agents now intensify their search for Delgado.
We started interviewing extended family members to see if we could get any cooperation from them. Initially, we weren't successful. They didn't want to cooperate, but ultimately some of them did. And that was very helpful in ultimately locating her.
I believe the phone was instrumental in tracking. They were able to pick up who she was calling and where money transfers were being made for her to have money to live on out there.
We received information that her family was sending her money via some money transfer business, and we were able to corroborate some of that. We saw some money going down to a state in Mexico where we knew she had relatives.
This information is further corroborated by a tip directly to investigators.
We received information that Brenda was at a specific location in Mexico, and the tipster began providing detailed information of where Brenda was at.
It allowed us to identify her exact location in Mexico, and we relayed that to Mexican Interpol officers, and they arrested her, within hours after we passed on that information.
Texas authorities moved to extradite Brenda Delgado from Mexico to the United States.
It's a long process to do that. I mean, our State Department has to reach out to whoever's the comparable authority in Mexico City. I mean, I don't remember how long that process took, but 6 months to a year. I mean, it was a good while.
For the process to work, certain conditions must be met.
Brenda was a dual citizen, Mexico citizenship and American citizenship. And Mexico has a standing policy that they do not extradite any of their nationals, any of their citizens, into a death penalty situation.
The deal was that she would not be put to death here in the States. So in order for us to apprehend her and bring her back, we had to agree to that.
We flew to Mexico on October 5th of 2016. We met Mexican authorities in a hangar at the airport. We searched her. We placed the restraints on her that she would be wearing on the flight. We were able to board the flight before any of the other passengers through the back entrance and flew back to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport nonstop.
I actually met her when she arrived here. I was the first face that she saw when she walked in the airport hangar. I'm a pretty competitive person, and even though I didn't get a chance to interview her again, in my mind, I was like, I told you I was gonna get you.
Prosecutors now need to prepare for 3 trials: Brenda Delgado, Crystal Cortez, and Christopher Love.
I've been working in the Dallas Homicide Unit for a little over 9 years. And out of every murderer that I've come across, Christopher Love is about as cold as any murderer that I've dealt with. No sign of remorse, no sign of emotion, no sign of regret.
This is a vicious, vicious, vicious person.
Christopher Love was sentenced to death. He's still on death row from what I understand, and I don't know if a date's been set yet for that.
Crystal Cortez's fate has already been more or less agreed.
Crystal was charged with capital murder as well, based on her agreement to testify against Christopher and also to testify against Brenda. She was given 35 years in prison.
In the case of Brenda Delgado, prosecutors paint a picture of a ruthless manipulator.
They did a great job at pointing out the specific facts of this investigation and just kind of like laying out who Brenda was. You know, that she's not just this pretty face that you see sitting in a courtroom, that this lady's a monster.
I don't think she even thought much about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Brenda had a very blank look on her face, almost like she was in disbelief that she was actually sitting in this courtroom and that she was being held accountable for what she did.
I don't really know that she felt right and wrong. I don't really know that she felt any guilt. The best word I can come up with is sociopathic.
She just appeared to be very nonchalant and like everything was okay, and it would be until the very end.
When the jury deliberate, they aren't long about coming to a decision.
So I was going down the escalator, and this is, we're less than 20 minutes since the jury went out, and I get a text message, we've got a verdict.
I think we startled some folks. We came back in a half an hour. It was not flippant, however. It was not off the cuff. We came back into the jury room, and someone suggested that we take a sample vote. This is the gut check vote. Let's just write down what we think, and then we'll start talking about it. So a woman volunteered to capture the notes. We all wrote down what we thought, and she opened them up, and they were all in one pile, one after the other. Guilty, 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 guilty.
That's very unusual. In a capital murder case, for the jury to come back, I heard estimates of 18 to 20 minutes that they deliberated. Yeah, that's unheard of. So they were convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed this crime. First and foremost, this was a Dallas Police Department homicide investigation. And everybody understood their roles, and everybody understood that the primary goal was to identify everybody who was involved in this murder for hire and to get everybody arrested and in a courtroom to face the charges against them. And I think every agency did a great job at that.
I think working cases like this just makes it hard for you to trust individuals. But on a positive note, it's kind of offset by all the positives that I learned from working with the family and also the detectives on this case.
There may be a victory of sorts in the convictions, but for the family of Kendra Hatcher, there is just loss.
The thing that bothered me the most about this case was this could have been anyone. Kendra is a truly innocent victim, and she never saw any of this coming. For her to be ambushed and assassinated in a parking garage like an animal, it bothered me. And it is one of those things that you just never forget.
It's such a senseless, tragic loss of life that didn't need to happen. Just the lengths that someone would go to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend. That's very chilling, and it's a stark reminder of kind of the world we live in.
Nothing anyone can do will bring Kendra Hatcher back, and for her family, the pain of losing her endures.
For the family, I don't feel there's closure. The word is a great word. We hear it and we think curtains are shut and we can no longer see what's behind them. But I do not believe that there is true closure in a case like this.
Their sister was taken from them in an instant, without any warning and without any reason. So I don't know how you come to terms with that. It's got to be extremely difficult.
We can never bring back Kendra, but we can say, hey, we got the people that were responsible.
On the morning of January the 5th, 2010, a woman is reported missing after failing to show up for work.
She was reported missing by a friend of hers who she worked with at the JCPenney store.
Police called out to the woman's home and discovered signs of suspicious activity.
Once we went in and really took a look at things, something occurred in that apartment.
Someone had obviously made some efforts to clean. On all four walls was blood spatter.
Police identify the woman as 35-year-old Sherry Harlan, a retail worker with a troubled past.
She was doing her best to get some help. You know, sometimes we don't always make the best decisions.
Days later, human remains are discovered in a burnt-out car nearby.
Inside the vehicle was what appeared to be a burned human skull in the driver's seat.
We ran the vehicle, it came back to Sherry. We had a pretty good idea that the skull inside of the car was going to belong to her.
Detectives begin to discover that there are two men in Sherry's life, and that her death appears to be at the center of a love triangle turned tragedy.
Sherry responded something to the effect of being with two men at the same time, you know, it's going to make your stomach upset, LOL.
This is a story of jealousy and how uncontrollable rage can lead to deadly consequences. Everett, Washington State, is a vibrant city, located about 25 miles north of Seattle. It is the largest city in Snohomish County, and unfortunately has its struggles with crime.
Everett's about 120,000 people. It's a port city on the Puget Sound. I would characterize it as a kind of a blue-collar city that is very near the mountains, and you can see them on either the Olympic Peninsula or the Cascade Range to the east.
From 2002 to 2000 and just the beginning of 2015, we averaged about, I want to say, 4 or 5 murders a year. We had a lot more call-outs than that, but they were serious assaults and things like that, because we handled all kinds of, assault cases where not everyone was killed. We handled those cases too. But murders, it could average up to 12 some years, but during that span of time, it really varied.
Everett is home to 35-year-old Sherry Harlan. On the morning of the 5th of January 2010, colleagues become concerned when she does not show up for work.
She was reported missing by a friend of hers who she worked with at the JCPenney store at the mall. And friends of hers, when they realized they hadn't seen her in a few days, went to her apartment house, and there was a neighbor or landlady, and both Sherry and her dog Roscoe were missing.
Investigators begin looking into the life of Sherry Harlan. They learn she is a member of the pagan Wicca religion and regularly spends time at the local church.
Wicca is the worship of nature, the balance. We see nature as sacred. We believe that the world is a reflection of deity and that the whole earth is goddess. Sherry had a very complicated past, and I understand that she was doing her best to get some help. Sometimes we don't always make the best decisions.
After search efforts to locate Sherry Harlan yield no results, police obtain a warrant to enter her home.
Once we went in and really took a look at things, it definitely, something occurred in that apartment that led me to believe something serious had happened to Sherry, or that she was a homicide victim.
When law enforcement initially entered Sherry's apartment, they noticed a kind of an overwhelming smell of bleach. Someone had obviously made some efforts to clean portions of the apartment. Linoleum had been removed from various portions of the apartment. In the bedroom itself, on all 4 walls, was blood spatter.
There was some carpet that had been cut up. There was a t-shirt with a partial shoe print on the t-shirt.
There was a futon-type mattress that had several what appeared to be knife cuts in it. There was a glove that had what appeared to be human tissue on it. So everything about this scene was telling law enforcement that violence had occurred there, that someone had been copiously bleeding, and that somebody took some effort to clean it up. The detectives, because of the nature of the scene inside the apartment, contacted the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab crime scene investigation team. Law enforcement talked to several individuals who had indicated they'd heard an argument on January 2nd, so Saturday morning, between a male and a female. One of the things that they wanted to find out was anything they could about Sherry Harlan. They contacted the manager of the apartment complex and found out that a man by the name of Dan Young had paid both the first and the last month rent for the apartment, had co-signed on the lease for the apartment. Law enforcement contacted some of Sherry's friends and inquired, who is this Dan Young guy?
In the months prior to her disappearance, Sherry had entered a romantic relationship with Dan Young, an older man who financially assisted her and helped her move out of her previous apartment.
He was more settled. He had some money. He helped Sherry put a down payment on the apartment and move in, and helped her get a computer, and was helping her, get some tools together that she could get to kind of go on with her life.
Well, Mr. Young was never really on our radar as a person of interest. He was clearly somebody that we wanted to talk to, particularly once we kind of found out about the nature of his relationship with Sherry. He gave up his phone and allowed law enforcement to look at his phone, and they were able to document a series of text messages between Sherry and Mr. Young the morning of January 2nd. That Saturday morning she went missing. He was clearly going to be a person that had information that law enforcement wanted, because he would put what occurred to Sherry in context.
Sherry was in her 30s. She was, very likable. She had good friends. She and her friend from the store where they worked, they'd get together on weekends and drink coffee on the porch and share romance novels. And, people really liked her. She'd had a bit of a troubled life and was on again, off again with her boyfriend, Eric Christensen.
On January 2nd, 2010, neighbors reported hearing a horrible, violent fight inside the apartment. They could hear arguing. It was known that Mr. Christensen was a violent person and a jealous person, and so the reasonable inference is that they were fighting in there and he was mad at her about something.
She was close to a number of different people, but she had atrocious lock-in picking men.
Yeah, her friends did not like him. He was jealous, he was super controlling, and they all told her not to do it.
Detectives begin looking into the background of Sherry's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Eric Christensen. Suspicions are soon to arise as they start to find worrying reports of his criminal history. On the morning of January the 5th, police are notified of the disappearance of 35-year-old Sherry Harlan. They obtain a warrant to enter her home and discover signs of a possible homicide. Blood splatter on the walls, pieces of human tissue, and the linoleum floor has been removed. Detectives look into the background of Harlan and discover she had a tumultuous relationship with a man named Eric Christensen.
So I had the information from her coworker that she was living with a man out in Gold Bar by the name of Eric Christensen.
I knew of Eric Christensen, and I knew that he had been released from prison and that he was coming to the church and that he had a very intense and controlling personality.
Once law enforcement got the name of Eric Christensen as a person really of interest in this probable homicide, they checked out to see if he had any criminal history. And Mr. Christensen had quite a bit. He was from Oregon also. From Oregon, he had a statutory rape charge or conviction. He had a forgery conviction. And then from the mid-90s, he had 2 counts of assault in the first degree that had occurred when he had attempted to shoot an ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend with a rifle.
He took a rifle to a bus stop where he knew his girlfriend was going to be and attempted to kill her. If that isn't a warning flag, I don't know what is. So he served time for that.
When Eric found out and he got out of jail and he went back home, he found out that she was gone. One of the residents of the house, he lived in the backyard of a property. And one of the residents of the house, who was his friend, he had asked, where did Sherry go? And that's how he found out where she was living. When he found out about it, he found out where she lived, and he started showing up at her place. And at one point, Sherry went out to her vehicle to go to work, and this is information coming from her friends that we're talking to. He had done something to her vehicle so it wouldn't start. So he was doing little things to try to get back into her life.
Sherry became more and more distant from those close to her, causing her friends and family to become worried about her relationship with Christensen.
After law enforcement got the information that, Mr. Christensen was somebody they wanted to talk to on January 5, efforts were made to contact him. They knew that he lived in Gold Bar and were making efforts to find him so they could talk to him. They got information that he was at a hospital in the Monroe area, which is a short distance from Gold Bar. So a detective and a uniformed officer went to meet him to see if he'd be willing to talk to them.
Then we had information that they saw her vehicle parked out in the parking lot, and they saw Eric with her dog.
They contacted him outside of the medical facility and noticed almost immediately that one of his hands was pretty heavily bandaged. Christensen's explanation for the cut on his hands is that it occurred after he left Sherry's apartment on January 2, and a couple of quote-unquote Mexicans jumped him and attempted to rob him. What was pretty critical about that interview is that Christensen admitted to having an argument with Sherry Harlan on the morning of January 2nd.
And basically he admitted to being over at Sherry's house that weekend. So that Saturday night, that argument that was heard by the neighbor was a valid argument. He admitted to being there.
He did not deny that they had an altercation. He even claimed to have lost a fingernail in the fight.
So Christensen, while he was talking to Detective Betts, had indicated that when he had gotten out of jail on, I think it was the 14th of December, and found out that Sherry had moved out of the place that he and she had shared, he had confronted her about her relationship with Dan Young. Christensen told Betts that both he and Sherry were committed Wiccans, and that he had eventually talked her into coming back into the relationship with him, and then engaging what he termed a blood oath, where she would promise not to have any further contact with Dan Young.
When we talked with Eric about it, when the detectives talked to Eric, he talked about being involved with that church and how this blood oath thing that he did with Sherry, after he found out she moved out and he got back together with her, they did the blood oath, and that was supposed to mean that she was never going to leave him again.
What she had to do was she had to confess what she was doing 3 times.
Okay.
And she had to prick her own blood, her finger, but she couldn't actually do it, so I had to do it.
She couldn't do it, so you had to do it for her?
Yeah, and so she put 3 drops of her own blood in this.
In this mixture?
Yes, and mix it all up, and it got burned.
Okay.
Now,
so what does that signify when you do that?
That signifies that you're totally willing to do this. You're giving your own life essence.
Oh, okay.
To do this.
All right. So what was the sin that she confessed?
That there would be no more sugar daddy whatsoever.
Okay. So she had to say that 3 times?
Yes.
Okay.
After we spoke to Eric with all the information we got from him, that's when we did another search warrant to search his house, his shack out in Gold Bar. And when we went out there and searched that, we had more evidence to indicate that he was involved in this murder.
At the time he was arrested, he made comments about making her sign an oath, to not see this other man that had been in and out of her life, suggesting that he was attempting to control her in whatever way possible.
Once law enforcement got into the home, they found a number of items. They found a pair of tennis shoes that had apparent blood on them. What was interesting about these shoes is the sole of those shoes had the same kind of markings on it that the bloody shoe print that was found in Sherry Harlan's apartment had. There were several rings that were found inside of Christensen's car. Both of the rings had blood on the interior of the bands. So when law enforcement served their search warrant on Christensen's, both his home and his vehicle, they located what they termed a shopping list. And this shopping list had items on it like bleach, garbage bags, mop, gloves. They were also able to find receipts from various stores indicating the purchase of those types of items on January 4th and 5th. So at approximately 2 p.m. on January 7th of 2010, citizens found a burned out vehicle in a gravel pit off of Reeder Road, which is in East Snohomish County. Law enforcement was contacted and went to the vehicle and found essentially a burned out Hulk. What they discovered inside the vehicle, however, was what appeared to be a burned human skull in the driver's seat.
We ran the vehicle, it came back to Sherry. We had a pretty good idea that the skull inside of the car was going to belong to her. We also found some knives in the car and in the trunk. There was a block of knives in the trunk and a single knife up in the front compartment of the vehicle, and one of the knives had a broken knife tip.
In addition to the skull and a knife on the front seat of the front driver's seat of the vehicle, they discovered in the trunk of the car what appeared to be a stack of linoleum that appeared to be a match for the linoleum that had been removed from Sherry's apartment. Ultimately, the medical examiner came out and collected the skull. It was the only body part that was located inside the vehicle, and took that back to the medical examiner's office. Once the medical examiner's office, it was examined, it was photographed, and it was x-rayed. During the x-rays, they were able to determine there was a tip of a knife that had been broken off in the skull, and ultimately that knife tip matched a knife that had been located in the vehicle by the police when they were searching it. A positive identification of the skull belonging to Sherry didn't occur until a forensic odontologist took a look at the skull and was able to compare the teeth in the skull to dental records that had been recovered from Sherry's dentist.
This is definitely not an ordinary occurrence. This was a very unusual crime investigation at that point in time. The decapitated head found in a burned out car that's been mutilated by stabbing it with a knife. The police knew that this was a very unusual case in terms of my career. I would say that it's the most gruesome homicide I ever worked on, and it's one of the most significant cases I ever worked on when I was a prosecutor.
On January the 7th, 2010, Eric Christensen is arrested for the murder of Sherry Harlan. Detectives in Everett, Washington State, are investigating the murder of 35-year-old Sherry Harlan. Her remains were discovered on January the 7th, 2010, when her skull was found inside her burnt-out vehicle, just 2 days after she was reported missing. Police have charged her jealous and controlling boyfriend, Eric Christensen, with her murder. Then, on January the 9th, investigators receive a surprising phone call.
On January 9th, law enforcement got a call from a young man by the name of Ryan Gesme, and he said he had information about the homicide of Sherry Harlan. I got a call from detectives. I went up to the Major Crimes Unit, and Detective Willeth and I had a pretty brief initial meeting with Mr. Gesme.
Ryan seemed like a very nice guy. He had met Sherry and Eric through the church and had befriended them, but he was also at the same time a very easily intimidated, kind of very gullible kind of person. And he explained that he had gotten a call from Eric the weekend prior, which would have been the weekend that all this happened, where the fight was heard. He got a call from Eric, who had run out of gas apparently, and he needed Ryan to meet him at a park and ride to come out to help him. So Ryan gets there and he notices that Christensen's not in his vehicle, he's in Sherry's vehicle. And he notices that in the back of the car, he sees rolled up rolls of vinyl and pieces of carpet. And he tells us that Eric told him he needed his help, that he needed to get rid of some garbage in the back of the car. And Eric had Ryan drive him to several different locations up off of Reeder Road. It's a 2-lane road kind of in East County where it's very treed and a lot of blackberry bushes and a lot of hiding places. So he had Ryan drive him to multiple locations where he'd have him arbitrarily just stop. Eric would get out, grab a bag, and toss it into the woods.
Ryan Gesme comes to the police station to do an official interview.
What happened when you got there?
I pulled in and parked where the wood chips were.
Okay. And what did Mr. Christensen do?
He went to the trunk and got out a bag.
What kind of bag?
A garbage bag.
Did you know what was in it at that time?
Not at the time, but he told me it was part of her torso afterwards.
Okay, after he already got out of the car and...
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what did you see him do? He took the bag out?
He took the bag out. He grabbed the shovel out of the trunk.
Okay.
And then he walked up into the woods.
I would imagine it'd be really difficult to be asked or told that you need to drive somebody around so that they can dispose of body parts of a human being that they've killed and dismembered, and then that person is sitting in the passenger seat directing you where to go, talking about their day, going on like everything is okay. That has to be a pretty disconnected experience.
He had helped Christensen dispose of Sherry's body and body parts, and he wanted to give that information to law enforcement. And after we got just that very little bit of information from him at the initial meeting, it was really apparent that Ryan had some criminal exposure. So we got him hooked up with a lawyer, somebody that would look out for his interest, and ultimately had Ryan give us what we call a proffer 2 days later on January 11th. A proffer is a statement that a potential witness can give law enforcement that we're not able to use against him in a trial.
Ryan takes investigators to the various dumping sites.
We did take Ryan out onto Reeder Road and about the approximate location of where her body was thrown, and we did recover, most of the portions of her body we recovered.
Ryan Gesme reported to the police that Christensen had reached out to him for help in disposing of the body, and that the body had been carved up into 8 independent pieces.
Once Ryan Gesme led law enforcement to the various locations where the body parts had been discarded, law enforcement went to each of those scenes and attempted to make efforts to locate them. In some of the locations, it was relatively easy to find the body parts because they were just laying on top of the forest floor. Several of the body parts, however, had been buried, and the detectives and the uniformed deputies were unable, at least initially, to find them.
Ryan would do anything for you. He'd give you the shirt off his back. And I think Eric knew that. And he also threatened Ryan's family if Ryan told anybody. Well, what I do know is that one of his family members was driving down the road and saw him sitting against the car and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said, "Go home. Go home." And so they left, but they knew something was up. And so they pushed it and they didn't let it go. And that's when he broke down and said that this is what had happened, and he was very right to go to the police. He was very confused and scared.
Christensen had made a number of statements that he had quote-unquote done it and had quote-unquote killed her. He then asked Gesme to help him over the course of the next couple of days, help him discard the various body parts. Ryan described to law enforcement how various parts of Sherry's disarticulated body had been placed in plastic garbage bags, and those garbage bags had been placed into the trunk of her car. And then over the course of the 4th and 5th, they had dumped those body parts off of Reeder Road in East Snohomish County. Ryan had a pretty good memory of where it was that the various body parts had been discarded by Eric. And he had described for law enforcement that as they were driving up Reeder Road, Ryan was driving, Christensen was in the front passenger seat, and Christensen would just on occasion tell Ryan to stop. The vehicle would stop. Christensen would get out of the vehicle, go to the trunk, grab a garbage bag containing a body part, grab a shovel, and then wander off into the woods. The medical examiner did discover 3 stab wounds in Sherry's torso, and also the stab wound in her head that left the knife tip embedded in her skull.
Once we built the case and once we had the information that we did, we charged him for murder.
The morning of January 2nd, Sherry had been complaining of an upset stomach, and Christensen had gone across the street to Walmart to buy her some medicine for her stomach. While Christensen was out of the apartment, Sherry and Dan Young had been texting back and forth, and Sherry had complained of the upset stomach that she had. In response to that complaint of her upset stomach, Young had responded something to the effect of being with 2 men at the same time, it's going to make your stomach upset, LOL. Based upon interviews with Christensen and how he reacted to law enforcement and what some of the witnesses overheard later that morning, law enforcement inferred that Mr. Christensen had read those text messages while Sherry was in the shower, confronted her when she got out of the shower, and then subsequently killed her based upon the information that she had violated an earlier promise to him not to see Mr. Young anymore.
It was a violation of the blood oath that they had taken. It was probably humiliating to Eric Christensen to be cheated on. He flew into a jealous rage and decided in that moment that he was going to kill her.
He was so jealous, he basically had told her when they took that oath that it was them two and them two only. And she wasn't supposed to be talking to Dan Young anymore, and when he saw that, that's when he got angry enough and killed her.
In a case like this, particularly as graphic as the various crime scenes were, particularly the kind of the horrific manner in which Christensen had disarticulated the body, we want to make sure that we are able to tell our story, what happened to Sherry, how we know that happened, and how that indicates that the murder was premeditated.
May the 25th, 2010, Everett, Washington State. Eric Christensen is brought to trial, charged with the first-degree murder of retail worker Sherry Harlan. After 5 months of building a case against Christensen, prosecutors must now wait to see what the courts decide.
See, we never knew what his defense was going to be. We charged him with first-degree murder. We never knew what his defense to the case was going to be until we actually got into that courtroom.
We really needed to make a conscious decision about how we were going to present that evidence to the jury. We want to make sure that we are not just horrifying the jury by just throwing up, photographs of decapitated corpses, skulls, and body parts. So it was a fine line that we had to walk. The tack that I took was that ultimately this is a very, very simple case, and it's a case about a very jealous and controlling man that killed his girlfriend when she stepped out of line.
His defense was that it wasn't first-degree murder, it was second-degree murder. That's when we found out that Eric admitted that he had done this. But his defense was that he should not be charged with the first-degree murder, it should be a second-degree murder.
At various times throughout the trial, I would look at Christensen to see how he's reacting to various testimony. For the most part, Christensen was, somewhat stone-faced and somewhat, stoic throughout.
Throughout the trial, Christensen never denies killing Sherry, though his defense argues that there was no premeditation to the murder.
They argued throughout their case, both in opening and through the questions that they asked during the evidentiary portion of the trial, and then in closing, was that Christensen had in fact killed Sherry Harlan, but it had been done in a jealous rage, and that it had not been premeditated, but that it had been intentional.
Ryan Gesme was next to testify, a reluctant accomplice to the horrific disposal of Sherry's body. Gesme was given special immunity due to the information he was able to provide to the authorities throughout the investigation.
Gesme was an interesting witness because we were able to corroborate his initial story to law enforcement that he'd helped dispose of the body parts, because law enforcement was able to find the body parts that Gesme said he had helped Christensen dispose of. He's also a witness, however, that we have given immunity to. We have told him and his lawyer that if he testifies truthfully, that we are not going to charge him with any crime for what it was that he did in helping Christensen get rid of the body parts. The jury in this particular case took just over 3 hours to convict Eric Christensen of murder in the first degree.
It seems horribly out of sync, but Eric Christensen only received a sentence of 37.5 years.
I remember specifically during the trial, Eric would stare at people. He would try to make eye contact with the witnesses, and he would just stare at you. And then as the trial progressed and the jury went out and came back, he was laughing about it. I mean, he was smirking and really didn't care.
The blood oath is it's okay. Take your time. The blood oath is basically you make an oath between the gods and the goddesses.
Okay.
In the Wicca religion. And my understanding is if you break it, it's the ultimate price.
And what do you mean?
Which is what happened.
Okay, what do you mean by the ultimate price? What is the death? Okay.
During the oath, Sherry essentially promised or gave her oath that she wasn't going to have any further contact with Dan Young, and then pricked her finger and then dropped some blood into a flame from a candle. According to Mr. Christensen, in ancient times, if someone broke an oath of that nature, they would often be killed.
Blood oaths are not part of the Wiccan tradition. Blood oaths are, I think they're more movie sensationalized. I've never really had anybody in real life want to take one.
The Wiccans that law enforcement contacted were almost unanimous in indicating that the blood oath had really nothing to do with their church, and that Eric, Christensen was kind of out on his own, wanting to form his own group with a belief system that was less Wiccan and perhaps a little darker than what he was getting from the Wiccan community.
This was truly a person who didn't represent our faith and was using our faith to try to get out of or make excuses for his behavior.
By him making her agree to this blood oath thing, I think he already knew in his mind if she didn't do what he told her to do, she was going to die.
If we didn't secure a conviction, he would be out on the streets and would very likely kill one of his future girlfriends.
So what we know about Eric Christensen is that when he becomes jealous, when he thinks a woman has wronged him, he will either kill them or attempt to kill them. I'm not sure that that individual is ever going to be rehabilitated. And at this stage in the game, we just need to make sure we separate him for as long as we can from society and in particular women, so he doesn't get involved with anyone else and potentially have them do something that he doesn't like.
When I had heard that Eric was last seen with the dog and the dog was alive, and we knew that he had been out in Gold Bar, he lived out there, and we contacted him out in East County. I did everything I could. I believe I did put out some flyers and a press release looking for the dog, asking the public for help finding the dog, but unfortunately we never did find him. I think Eric killed him. That's my feeling.
The dog was seen in her car tied up at one point in time, and presumably with Christensen. He did make a cryptic remark about the dog, which was something to the effect of, she doesn't need her dog anymore. And that was not fully understood at the time, but what he was saying was she doesn't need her dog anymore because she's dead.
Sadly, Sherry's dog, Roscoe, has never been found. Once the trial has concluded, Sherry's family, friends, and many members of the Wiccan Church gather to remember her.
We would have gathered and cast sacred space, and then usually sing a song, invoke her spirit, tell her how much we cared about her, and then tell stories about when she did this, when she did that, things like that, and laugh and celebrate and remember her in a positive way as much as possible.
Everyone that I spoke to about Sherry talked about her being kind of a friendly person that made friends easily, that had an infectious laugh.
Do I believe her family has a sense of closure? I know that there are friends in her life that do not have a sense of closure. So I would not think so. I've not spoke to her family. I don't know that you'll ever get over something that happens like that. I don't have closure.
I don't know that family and friends ever get over something like that, because, the method in which somebody dies matters. I think it matters with what kind of nightmares you have later and how you live with it for the rest of your life. And I think this was so gruesome that it's probably hard to erase. Maybe there's some way to erase that. But again, learning to live with what happened is the real challenge.
That's something they just have to live with the rest of their lives, the loss of their family member. I don't think they look at it as being closure. I think that they look at it as the person responsible was held accountable, and therefore I can go on, but it's never going to be the same.